Hello everyone. Very good afternoon. So thank you very much for joining today's webinar. My name is Vivin Satyan and I have been working as a technical consultant in the Active Directory team for the past 5 years with ManageEngine. Now, first of all, what I'd like to do today is over the next 45 to 60 minutes, I'm going to be sharing with you a few tips that would be helpful for you in better managing your Active Directory infrastructure. I'm not saying that we do not have a tool in place that could help us do it. So what I'm trying to share with you today is few tips that would make the process a lot more easier. All right. So I have now come up with 7 tips. And these 7 tips, to make it more understandable, I have actually categorized them or split them into 3 different parts. So 7 tips, 3 different parts. We will be covering about various aspects of Active Directory management over the next 45 to 60 minutes. All right. Now, if you have any questions or if my voice is not audible or if you cannot see the screen, please make use of the chat window that is available on your screen to let us know so that we could do our best to deliver a finalized output. All right, let's get started here. So the first part of the agenda is about gaining insight on Active Directory. Now, when I say gaining insight on Active Directory, I'm going to show you how to generate or how to get information out from your Active Directory infrastructure without using PowerShell scripts. Because we as administrators do not have the luxury of time to get information out from Active Directory. But is getting information from Active Directory important? Yes, of course it is. So I'm going to show you the ways by which you can effectively retrieve information from Active Directory without using complex tools. So that would be the first part. Now the second part is not all the administrators have this responsibility of managing Active Directory nowadays. It has now become the responsibility of the IT technicians as well. And you also have help desk technicians. And then you have the HR initiating the user onboarding process. So nowadays, Active Directory is got to do something with all the users in your AD infrastructure. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you an effective model by which you can delegate stuff to other users in your Active Directory, but without altering their native Active Directory permissions. So I'm going to be discussing with you a non-invasive delegation model. So how to make things easier when it comes to delegation. Third part is all about automation, right? So with regards to automation, I'm going to be talking about 2 topics. The first one is I'm going to show you how to automate the process of user creation. So almost all the organizations that deploy Active Directory have this process of user onboarding and offboarding. So I'm going to show you how to automate the process. And the second part or the second task with regards to automation is I'm going to be showing you how to remove inactive accounts from Active Directory. All right. So let's say you have 2,000 users in your AD, in your Active Directory. Now, out of 2,000, at least 5% of the users would be in an inactive state. Now, what do I mean by inactive is users might have logged into your Active Directory infrastructure once, but they might not have logged in for, let's say, after that. So you would have stale accounts that have not logged into Active Directory for the past 180 days or 200 days. So I'm going to show you how to find out such accounts and remove them on a sequential and a very logical manner. Okay, I hope I have set the agenda clear for you. 3 parts, and we are going to get started with part number 1. Okay, now the first tip that I wanted to share with you is, out of the 7 tips, tip number 1 would be, whenever you are trying to find out or investigate the permissions of a specific user account in Active Directory, I would recommend you, or I would suggest you to look at their nested group memberships as well. Now, what do I mean by nested group membership? If you're wondering what do I mean by nested group membership, if I try to investigate the permissions of a specific user account in Active Directory, all I do is I log into my domain controller, open up the Active Directory users and computers, and then I do a double click on the user account and I get the user's property. And the first thing that I would be looking into is the member of tab. So going through the membership, I would be able to find out the groups that a specific user is a part of, right? But what the Microsoft console isn't giving you is, it's in the next slide, right? So the Microsoft console will be giving you the user's direct group membership. I have an account named ITHTT and I go to the member of tab of that account. The Microsoft console tells me that the account is a part of two basic groups. Alright, that's perfect. This seems to be very normal because these are the exact groups that I want this user to be a part of. Now everything looks fine. But the problem is the Microsoft console isn't going to tell you whether one of these two groups are in turn linked to any other top-level security groups in your domain. That's crucial, isn't it? So what I would request you to do is, whenever you are trying to investigate the permissions of a specific user account with regards to group membership, you need to investigate the nested group membership of the user account as well. In this case, the user is directly a part of domain users and ITHTT access group. Whereas the ITHTT access group, if you could just have a look at the other screenshot, is in turn linked to some of the top-level security groups in my Active Directory infrastructure. Now what happens here is, through nested group membership, this user account in Active Directory would have inappropriated elevated rights. So in order to avoid all this, we need to investigate the nested group membership of user accounts in Active Directory as well. So I'm going to quickly show you a tool that could effectively investigate the group membership of the user account, not only the direct group membership, but also its nested members, right? So this tool, if you're new to this tool, let me give you a quick introduction of what this tool is all about. The name of the tool is ADManager Plus. Now this tool is going to be an Active Directory management software that is going to help you replace your PowerShell or any other native Active Directory tools, right? And the report that is related to our first tip is investigating nested group membership. So we are trying to generate the reports groups for users, right? So I go to groups for users, and then what I do here is when I go to groups for users, I select a specific user account that I'd like to investigate the permissions for, and then I hit generate. So the minute I hit generate, this application gives me the list of all the groups that the user is directly a member of. But what is even important is, and this piece is missing in the Microsoft console, and that is the member of attribute. Now if you just have a look at the screen right here, this user account, IT admin, is a member of basic group 1 directly. But this basic group 1 is in turn a member of top admin group. So this gives you the direct as well as the nested group membership. Again, the point that I'm trying to drive is, whenever you're trying to investigate the permissions of a user account, please make sure that you investigate the nested groups as well. You can write a PowerShell script for finding this out, but I'm just suggesting an easier way of doing this. Alright, so that was tip number 1. Keep the nested group membership of a user account in mind as well. Now, let's move on to tip number 2, something related to permissions as well. But this tip is more to do with your folder permissions. Alright, so let's say you have a very confidential folder in Active Directory that has all the payroll information and all your contract information in it. And you want that folder to be accessible only by the people from the finance department of your organization. So you give a group of users the access to that specific folder, and you are administrator number 1 in your organization. and one fine day you try to investigate the permissions on that specific finance folder, and you have and you see that there are close to 20 users and 10 groups having access to that specific folder. Now, the point that I'm trying to drive here is whenever you have such business critical information or user critical information saved in one of your shared folders in a network path, please make sure that you do two things on a regular basis. The first thing that you'll have to do is you'll have to find out who has access to that confidential data and what level of access do they have. And that includes investigating the permissions of subfolders as well, right? So this is the first part that any administrator has to do. But the second part is during the analysis phase, if you find that the permissions are inappropriate, you will also have to clean up the permissions. So analysis and cleanup are the two things that any administrator has to do with regards to permission cleanup when it comes to files and folders, right? Now, if you are trying to do this one by one, just imagine, right? You do a right click on a folder, go to properties, security, find out the permissions, and then that folder has many subfolders within, and you have no idea about whether the inheritance is set to true or false. So in order to overcome all this, I'm going to show you two very easy steps. One for analysis, second one for permission cleanup. Let's go back to ADManager Plus, right? Again, first step, analysis. I'm going to find out who has access to business critical information or a specific folder in my organization. Now that we are talking about permissions, to be more precise, we are talking about NTFS permissions, right? So I go to NTFS report. The report that I'm trying to generate out of these four reports is I'm trying to find out the permissions for folders. I go to permissions for folders. I've already selected a share right here, which is the confidential share, all right? So I can very well select the permissions right here and then hit generate. Now, what happens here is if you are trying to get the list of users and groups who have access to your piece of information, the folder that you have selected here, then this report can very well give you this. But that's not it. I was talking not only about the parent folder, which is the confidential share in our case, but I was also talking about the subfolders within that folder, right? So you can query the permissions on these subfolders as well based on your requirement. And once you have got the list of permissions, our first step is almost over, which is the analysis part. Now you know that you have few users and groups have access to this piece of folder, right? And what is more alarming is this one right here. Everyone has access to this piece of information. And that is something that you do not want, because there's no point in giving everyone the rights to access and then think of that folder as being restricted, right? So what we're going to do now is I'm going to investigate the permissions further. I'm going to find out what level of permissions do these users and groups have on the selected folder. So I quickly go to advanced. So if I go to advanced, there you go. So I have the complete list of permissions not only on the parent folders but also on its subfolders as well. And what level of permissions do they have? It looks like they have full control over the folder. And is this full control applicable only to the selected folder, or is this applicable for the folders within it? You have the information right here, right? And is the inheritance set to true or false from the parent folder to the child folders? You have the information right here as well. So now that the first step is over, we know that these many users and groups have access. The immediate step that an administrator would like to perform is a permission cleanup, right? So an administrator might want only a specific group to be having access to the folder. So I quickly go to step number 2. From reports, I jump to the management tab because we're trying to manage something here. So I go to ADMG empty, and then I go to file server management. I go to modify NTFS permissions because that's what we're trying to do, right? Modify the permissions. When I go to modify permissions, again, all I need to do is just select the same confidential folder that we are discussing about. So I go to select. Now this pop-up gives me the list of all the file servers in my infrastructure, and it also gives me the list of all the shares within those servers. All right, so the share that we are talking about is the confidential share, right? I hit OK. Now I want this confidential share to be, let's assume that I've selected the confidential share right here. Now I want this confidential share to be accessed only by a specific group. So I hit select, and this gives me a pop-up window from where I can select the users or groups that should have access. So I can select users, or I can even select groups based on my requirement. All right. Now, so I have now selected an object. What level of permissions should they have? Should they have just read access, or should they have write as well, or should they just have complete ownership, right? So I can now decide the level of permissions that I'm going to grant to the selected user or group, and I can decide whether the permission should go to the other folders involved. And this can be an allow or a deny permission as well, to make things more easier for you. All right, so let's assume that you already have such folders in your organization and you want the exact permissions to be copied from that folder to the folder that we are talking about. You even have an option to copy permissions from another folder. This makes things even more uniform and simpler, right? Copying permissions from one folder to another folder. You can do this for any number of users or groups that you want in your infrastructure. So once you have done this, right, all you need to do is you need to remove the existing permissions. So now you have defined that who should have access to this piece of information, right? So the second thing that I want you to do is I want you to remove all the permissions. But the folder is now accessible by 20 groups and let's say 50 different users. So how are you going to remove these users one by one? That's the question. Instead of doing this one by one, this checkbox right here is going to wipe out the entire permissions on the confidential files and folders, right? So this checkbox. So I have selected the checkbox, and the minute I hit modify, this is going to do a complete permission cleanup of the files and folders and make sure that only the selected objects have access to the folder. So now our two steps are over with regards to permission cleanup. We have analyzed the permission using the reports, and we have cleaned up the permission using the management tab. All right, so this is how you maintain permissions on confidential files and folders in your infrastructure. All right, let's move on to tip number 3. Okay, now I'm not saying that this is the practice for the administrators all over the world, but I have seen this practice in at least 10% of the organizations that I have stepped into in order to deploy the Active Directory applications. And that practice is, if I create 5 user accounts in Active Directory today morning, most of the administrators have this habit of assigning the same password for all those 5 users, at least for the first time. And then you check a flag which will then force the user to change the password as soon as they log in. Right? That's the practice which at least 10% of the organization follows. And there's nothing wrong with it if you look at it from a surface level. But if you drill down, there can be a security loophole in it, and I'm going to reveal to you what is that security loophole, right? So I create 5 users today morning. All of them have the same password, and there's no problem. So if they have the same password and 4 users join the organization the next day, they change their password, everything is fine. But there's one user account or one user who has not joined the organization, but the Active Directory account is already created, and that account is an enable state, and that too, it's an administrator's account with the default password, right? Now, if I'm an intruder and if I'm trying to get hold of, let's say, one of the accounts in your organization, I would be interested in 2 attributes, right? The first attribute that I would be interested in is I would like to know whether the user has logged in or not, because there's no point in attacking an active user. As an attacker, I would always look for accounts that have not logged into the AD, but they are still in an enabled state with a default password. If I crack the password of the user who has not logged in, then what would I look for is I would look for when was the object created. Now that I know the account has not logged into Active Directory, I would then look for when was the object created. So these are the 2 things that I would look for as an intruder if I like to break into your organization. So when did the user log in? If the last logon indicates 0, then the user has not logged in once. I know that. Now I would see when was the user account created. If the user account was created yesterday, then I would not be interested in that account because I know that the user can log in anytime today. But if the when created timestamp is somewhere in the 1st of April or in the last week of March, I know that the account has not logged in and it's in an enabled state, and the account was created, let's say 20 days ago or 25 days ago. That's an account that I would be interested in as an attacker, right? Because I know that the user has not logged in and the account has still not been handled by the administrators. So there are good chances of me, let's say, getting into your organization, doing stuff that I want, and then retrieve without leaving any trail. So again, you can write a PowerShell script in order to find out whether there are any such users in your organization, but the script also has to take into consideration multiple attributes. So I'm going to show you an easy and simple report that could achieve not only the process of retrieving users, but also managing such users in your Active Directory infrastructure. Right? So we are going to find out users who have not logged into your Active Directory infrastructure, but their account is still in an enabled state in your AD, because this is something that you as an administrator would be interested in knowing. So I go to reports again, and then we are talking about users who have not logged in. So we have a separate category of reports right here, which is the logon reports, and I have the report right here, users who have never logged in. So I quickly go to the report and then I hit generate. There you go. So I have close to 224 users that have not logged into my Active Directory infrastructure. Now this is a test environment and that's why you have these many users, but in a live environment I'm pretty sure that you would be getting anywhere between let's say, depending on the size of the organization, it's going to be anywhere between 1 to 10 users at least that have not logged into your Active Directory infrastructure and their account is still in an enabled state in Active Directory, right? But here, if you just have a look at the example right here, let's take a look at this account, right? So I have an account by the name Amy Johnson. Now this account was created on the 18th of January 2017, but has not logged into Active Directory even once. And what is more important is I need to know the account status right now of this specific user. I need to know whether the account is enabled or disabled. The account status is right here. It says that the account is in a disabled state. So you're now somewhat in a safe zone, right? So you know that the account has not logged in for more than 3 months. and the account is disabled. Excuse me. And the account is now disabled. All right. But what if the account is enabled? So if one of the accounts listed here shows up as enabled and the account was created, let's say 20 days ago, there are good chances that an intruder might be interested in those accounts. So the first step, what I want you to do is, if you find such accounts in an enabled state, select those user accounts and quickly disable them from the report itself. And what I want you to do is, then I want you to go to more actions and I want you to move users to a separate OU. Now, from a security standpoint, it is very important that you move such never logged on accounts to a separate OU and then monitor them, right? Because let's say that a user has not logged in for 45 days and all of a sudden you sense a VPN connection being established by one of these user accounts. That definitely has to be brought to your notice, right? So if you have an auditing solution in place, you can very well monitor the OU to which you are moving those inactive accounts, and you can sense such activities, or you can get alerted in real time for such activities. We have a separate auditing piece, which is AD Audit Plus for auditing, or if you have another software for giving you real-time audit information, you can also make use of that audit software to track activity of any of these accounts, right? So it's very important to find out users who have not logged in to your Active Directory infrastructure. All right. Now, this is going to be a pretty interesting tip. I assume that I'm talking to administrators on the other end of this webinar. So I have been to a couple of organizations and I have seen administrators impose strict password policies for other users in their organization. But for some reason or the other, they exclude themselves from such, from such password policies. So, for example, the password policy forces a user to change the password once in every 45 days, let's assume. So, whereas an administrator's account is excluded from that policy, and one possible reason for that could be the administrator might not know whether something would break if he changes the password, right? Because the administrator's account might be configured in, let's say, 5 servers as a service account in some form or the other, and the administrator does not have any clue about where those service accounts are. So if the administrator is going to update the password by logging into his laptop, that might break a SQL service account somewhere running on one of those servers. And since the administrators, I'm not saying all of them have this practice, but since most of the administrators, or at least some of the administrators, have this habit or have this fear, what we have done is we have now come up with a free tool, right? Again, I repeat, it is a free tool that is going to help administrators find such service accounts so that they can update their credentials without having the fear of breaking such service accounts, right? So it is very important for us to find out whether there are such any, privileged accounts in Active Directory, like your domain admins or administrators or schema admins or enterprise admins with unchanged password. Because if you have a domain administrator account that has not changed the password for more than 90 days, that is the #1 security threat for any organization. Because if I'm an intruder and I get hold of the domain admin credentials, it's basically like giving away the keys to your kingdom. I can very well modify the GPO or play with any sorts of other domain administrator level privileges and then bring your business down for a good 45 minutes, right? So first step is we need to find out whether there are any service accounts that are using your credentials. And then you can very well force your admin accounts to change the password. I'm going to talk about the first step and then come back to finding out whether there are any such admin accounts with unchanged passwords. All right. So I'm going to give you a free tool right here. So what I want you to do is, in order to gain or download the free tool, you can very well go to our main landing site, which is manageengine.com. And then if you go to products, right? So the first link would be products. And if you go to the products, you have related free tools, Active Directory free tools, all right? So you click the Active Directory free tools, you would see a download button right here. Now this download button will give you access to 17 different free tools in one single bundle. Again, this is a free tool. And the free tool that we are interested in is going to be the Service Account Management tool, right? Now this tool is going to give you the list of all the service accounts running in any of your servers in your Active Directory infrastructure. Not only that, you can filter out just the user-based services, because you have all the default services and then you have the user-based services. We as administrators are interested in the user-based services. You then get to know where your credential is configured and what service is using your credential. So you can very well go to that specific server and update your password even before changing it, or without the fear of breaking any services, right? So this is the free tool that I wanted to share with you. Now once you have the list of services, right, you can very well then go back to ADManager Plus and then find out whether there are any users in your AD, that includes administrators, with unchanged passwords. So you go to passwords report and then you go to password unchanged users, and what you're going to do now is you are going to find out whether there are any users in your AD who have not changed their password for the last 90 days. You can specify the time period by hitting the drop down box here, but I'm now going to find out whether there are any users with unchanged password for 90 days. I generate, I get the list. So there are 56 users that have not changed their passwords in the last 90 days, right? So if I'd like to, and there might be admin users from in this report. So you can very well find out whether there are such admin users by adding their group membership to the report. So you just go to add or remove columns and add the group membership attribute, right? So once you have added the group membership attribute to this report, you now know the group that these users are a member of. And if you find that there are any such admin accounts with unchanged password for more than 90 days, you select those accounts, right? And then you force them to change password at next logon. Now they can very well change the password without having the fear of breaking any services, because we already know that their credentials have been configured in these services, and we can very well update the password as well. So that was tip number 4. Finding out users who have not changed their password and forcing them to change their password immediately, but also giving them the visibility about where their credentials are configured in your Active Directory infrastructure. All right, so that brings me to the end of part number 1. Now part number 2 is delegation. All right, because you as an administrator would want to you would want the help desk technician to be resetting password for other users. You would want someone else in the help desk to create user accounts in Active Directory. So if you are planning to delegate such stuff in Active Directory, I'm going to be showing you an effective delegation model. All right, so that brings me to tip number 5 out of 7. Now this is a checklist that any administrator has to have in mind even before they are planning to delegate some actions to other users in your AD. Now, the first point in this checklist is clarity of rights. whenever you're delegating an action to another user in Active Directory, it is always important that we have exact clarity of the actions that we're trying to delegate, because with regards to Microsoft, if you are selecting one checkbox in the backend, it could be multiple checkboxes. For instance, if you give the user the privilege to delete user accounts in Active Directory, that could further branch down to deleting users, deleting computers, deleting contacts, deleting groups. So we need to be very precise, or we need to be sure about the exact rights that we are delegating. That is point number 1 in the checklist. Point number 2 is precise restrictions. You do not want your help desk technicians to be resetting passwords of your domain admins. That is something that you do not want. So we must impose precise restrictions when we delegate an action. And if you are delegating an action to a user on a temporary basis, and when the user is done performing the action, the task that you have delegated should be very easy to revoke. So that should be there. Point number 3 in the checklist. Point number 4 is when you are actually delegating an action to a user account in Active Directory, if you're doing it the Microsoft way, you are actually raising the existing permission of a user account by delegating an action. So when you are raising a permission or when you are raising permissions of a specific user account in your AD, please make sure that the permissions are not clumsy. You don't want a user to be a member of 100 different groups just because of delegation. So the native permission should be handled very effectively. So that is point number 4. And what is even more important is you can delegate any actions to any user in your AD, but it is very important to track the changes done by those users. So if anything goes wrong, you then have an information in hand as of who did the specific action. When you have all these checklists checked off, that's when we can say that you have an effective delegation model in place. Now, with this checklist, I'm going to quickly show you the Microsoft way of delegating permissions. I'm pretty sure that most of you would have seen this, the delegation of control wizard with Microsoft, right? So if you are trying to delegate an action to a specific user account in Active Directory, there are two ways by which most of us would do it. The first action is we assign a user, or we add a user to a specific group in Active Directory so that the user gets the right and then he performs the action in AD, right? That's the first way of doing it. Now the second way of doing it, I'm pretty much sure that most of you would not be following this, but this is Microsoft's recommendation. You do a right click on an OU, you go to delegate control, that's when you get the delegation of control wizard popping up. You can then decide what are you going to delegate to your user accounts in Active Directory, and you can also pick and choose whether you're going to delegate this to a specific user or you're going to delegate it for an entire group. It's fine. This looks fine. But the problem with this is, the problem with this delegation of control wizard is, if I select, let's say, if I go to create a custom task right here, and I select few checkboxes, and what happens is, if I select a checkbox by mistake, and then I give the user the permission, if I'm trying to find out, oh, what permission did I just give this user account? If I'm trying to review the permission that I just gave to a user account using the delegation of control wizard, I don't get a clear picture, because you need to go back to the OU, security tab, verify the delegations on that specific OU for that specific user account. So you don't get a bird's eye view of the exact delegation that you have performed, right? And now that you're not the only administrator in your organization, there can be other administrators who have delegated certain actions to the same user in another OU. So we don't get an option to track all the delegations that have been made to a specific user. Delegating itself is a bit of a task with the DOC, and tracking the delegations becomes much more complicated. In order to avoid all this, in ADManager Plus, we have something called as task controllers, right? As you can see in the screen, this task controller decides basically what a user can do and cannot do in Active Directory. Now you might be wondering, okay, what is the big deal with this task controller? It looks pretty much the same as the DOC. The main advantage of going with the delegation model of ADManager Plus is you can delegate a reset password function or an account unlock function to another user in your AD, but that is in no way going to alter the user's Active Directory permissions. The user would only be able to perform these two functions, reset password and unlock account. I'm just giving you an example. These two actions by logging into ADManager Plus from their laptops. The minute they sign out of the application, their Active Directory permissions still remain unaltered. Now, what is the big deal? What is the advantage? I don't see any advantage in this. So one major advantage, as I told you, is no elevation of permissions in Active Directory. You're just giving them a role and they perform the action, they sign out, their permissions are still the same. That's the first advantage. The second advantage is I have seen administrators complaining to me that there are too many users in their organizations that are logging into domain controllers in order to perform simple stuff, right? And when you have a helpless technician logging into your domain controller and you tell him, hey, you're not supposed to be logging into a domain control, a specific, you're not supposed to be viewing objects of a specific OU, an organizational unit. The first thing that the technician would do is go to the OU and just have a look at the accounts in that specific OU. Okay, now the point that I'm trying to drive here is you delegate an action to a user using the Microsoft way, but there are certain restrictions that we cannot impose. But with this role in place, you can impose them, impose an organizational unit-based restriction, group-based restriction, so that the helpless technician does not reset the domain admin's password, for example. And you can also impose an attribute level restriction. You can even restrict the role to a specific attribute, right? So that's the delegation model that we follow within ADManager Plus. And what is even more important is you have 10 technicians, all 10 of them logging into ADManager Plus, performing the actions you want them to perform. You have an easier way of tracking all their actions that they perform through the application. Be it a success or a failure event, the application tracks both. And this can go back in time and give you reports, let's say that dates back to the day of installation of the application. So you have an option to delegate and also to track the delegations made and the actions performed by your technicians. That takes me to the last part of my webinar, and that's going to be how do you automate stuff in Active Directory. And the first task that I'm going to automate is automating the process of user creation. Now, Microsoft has given us two options, right? If I'm creating one user account at a time, as you can see in the screenshot right here, do a right click, go to one of those OUs, do a right click, go to new, and then you select the user, type in your username and password, and you're done. You have created a new user account in Active Directory. Whereas if you're going to create multiple user accounts in Active Directory, Microsoft has given us something called as PowerShell scripts, right? So we are pretty much familiar with PowerShell scripts. Again, do not get me wrong, I'm not trying to belittle PowerShell here. This is a very powerful tool for retrieving information from Active Directory, but it has its own challenges. All right, so I'm going to share with you a sample PowerShell script for user creation. So this is a sample script that I Googled up for user creation, right? And As you can see in the screen, this script has 13 Active Directory attributes. But in reality, does a user account in Active Directory have just 13 attributes, or does the user account have more than 13 attributes? The answer is the user account definitely has more than 13 Active Directory attributes. That includes group membership, that includes OUs, Exchange mailboxes, Office 365 accounts, Google Apps, and whatnot. So you have a lot more than 13 attributes. So if you are going to write a script that is going to bring in all those other aspects as well, you can expect another 5 or 10 lines of code to this script, right? That's a bit complex. But there are certain other challenges with the PowerShell scripts as well. But what are the challenges with PowerShell scripts? If you are creating 5 user accounts in Active Directory, 3 of them went through perfectly fine. They are created with all the attributes that you want. 2 of them did not go through, right? PowerShell is not going to give you the exact error message for the failure of creation. That's challenge number 1. And the other challenges are maintaining uniformity. Right? So you create 5 accounts, all 5 of them belonging to 5 different departments. I have seen organizations that create accounts in Active Directory with different naming formats based on their job role or based on their departments in some cases. So if you are trying the same with the PowerShell, I guess you'll have to do it with multiple PowerShell scripts. And the next thing is handling duplicates. You create an account John Smith on day 1, and day 10 you create another account with the same name. PowerShell isn't going to tell you, hey, there's another user account in Active Directory. I have created the account in AD with a different naming format. No, PowerShell isn't going to tell you that. So PowerShell is not good at handling duplicates. And moreover, it's going to be time consuming. As I said, it's not just the AD account anymore. You have all these other platforms integrating with Active Directory. And some of you might be using Exchange, some of you might be using Skype for Business or Office 365. So we are talking about 360-degree provisioning of accounts, which is less time consuming, which is uniform, which is capable of handling duplicates. And that is the templates of ADManager Plus. Now, if you just have a look at the layout in the screen, this pretty much has almost all the Active Directory attributes. That includes the custom attributes as well. You create a template. Let's say that you're going to create a template per department, one template per department. You create the template, and next time you have a user account in Active Directory to be created for that department, load the template. Just type in the first name and the last name of the user account. That's all you need to do. And then hit create. The account would get created in Active Directory. Now, you might be wondering, oh no, in my organization, the HR actually initiates the user onboarding process, right? They fill in the first name and the last name of the user account in a simple form, and they maybe fill in the department as well, and they initiate the user onboarding process. So this layout cannot be handed out to a HR. You can customize this layout as well and then delegate it to the HR so that they fill out a simple form and they send it across to an IT admin for account creation, right? This layout can be customized as well. Handling duplicates? Yes. So you can handle duplicates to all major attributes in Active Directory so that if a duplicate entry is found, the template is smart enough to handle the duplicates. It can maybe apply a different naming format for the account that is about to be created when a duplicate is already existing, right? So there are all these amazing features within the template that could help you ease out the process of user creation and bring in uniformity and get things done in less time. To make things even more simpler for you, you can automate the process of user creation. all you need to do is tell the application that you want to create user with this specific template, and you have the name of the user saved in an Excel sheet, maybe in a network path. And you tell the application to create 5 accounts for you next Tuesday at 10 in the morning. The application will do it for you, right? So the only thing that you need to do is just type in the first name or the last name of the user account in the Excel sheet every time when you have a new user, and then save the Excel sheet in a network path. And you can very well define the network path here, and the application will take care of the rest. So I'm pretty sure by this time some of the administrators might be, oh, no, I don't want the application to automatically do anything in Active Directory. I want the application to notify me whenever it's going to do something so that I can review the request and then approve it if I find it correct, right? So if that's the kind of request and approve methodology that you're looking for, we give you an option to implement a business workflow. So the application is not going to do, it's not going to create user accounts in Active Directory. It would just raise a ticket for user creation and send it across to you with all the Active Directory attributes included. You as an administrator can review the request, and all you need to do is just hit create, and the account will get created in Active Directory. That takes me to the last tip of my webinar, which is removing inactive accounts from Active Directory automatically. And why is it important? Let me give you one reason why is it important. Okay, the major reason is from a security standpoint, you do not want an inactive domain admin account in your Active Directory environment. So you would want to handle those accounts, right? So one reason is that, and the other major reason is you have applications nowadays in your organizations that are licensed based on the number of users. If that's going to be the case, I would suggest that you pay only for the active users and not the inactive accounts. So you need to have a process in place that separates the active accounts in AD and the inactive accounts. And since the inactive accounts pose a security threat, there has to be an automated way of dealing with these inactive accounts, be it users or computers. And that's when ADManager Plus gives you the ability to create your own logic for removing such inactive accounts from Active Directory. Now, just have a look at the screen, and this is the sample logic that I have created, right? So the application, let's assume that it finds out users who have not logged into your AD for the last 6 months. And the first step, what the application would do is the application would move all those inactive accounts to a quarantine OU, right? It has now moved all those accounts to an OU. The second thing is the application would remove any admin accounts from the administrators group or any group that you define right here, because I don't want an inactive account to be a member of the domain admins group or the schema admins group or any built-in security privilege group in my organization. So I remove them from all the groups, right? And immediately I disable the accounts. Remove them from the groups, top level security groups, and then disable the accounts. So it's just not that. I then tell the application to wait for 60 days and then delete the accounts from Active Directory. So when I say delete, it's going to be just not the user account. It would delete the user's mailbox, Office 365 account, home folders, profile paths, Office 365 licenses. So everything related to the object would be deleted. Again, I see some of you are not comfortable with automating the process of deletion. You want, again, a request and approve methodology to be implemented. So that's when we give you an option to implement the business workflow, something similar to the one that we discussed for user creation, right? You define the policy right here. You select the report that we are trying to generate or you automate is inactive users for 180 days. You set it right here. Since this is a cleanup activity, you want this to be running on a monthly basis, let's say on the 10th of every month at 5 in the evening. The application now does everything for you, and it just raises a request, and it tells you, hey, there are 5 users who have been inactive for the last 180 days. Do you want to disable the account or delete the account from Active Directory? You as an administrator can then define or decide whether the accounts are to be deleted from Active Directory. All you need to do is just hit execute and the accounts will be deleted. All right. So a quick recap about the things that we saw in today's webinar. We saw some methods by which you can retrieve information from Active Directory, and I also showed you a non-invasive delegation model. What do I mean by non-invasive is we do not disturb the user's Active Directory permission. And we also saw some methods by which you can automate account provisioning with all the attributes that you want in less time and also with increased uniformity. And we also saw how to clean up your Active Directory infrastructure from such inactive user accounts or inactive computer accounts. Now, with all this said, I'm pretty sure that handling your Active Directory with your native tools or with the Microsoft native tools would look something like this. So I suggest you to actually come up with an effective model for cleaning up and handling your Active Directory infrastructure. So thank you very much, and if you have any questions related to this specific webinar or you'd like to know more about the application or the free tool that I discussed, please drop an email to the email address that you see on the screen, and I'd be more than happy to take up any questions, be it related to the product or be it related to Active Directory as well. All right, so I hope you find the session informative. Again, thank you very much for listening. You all have a nice day. Bye-bye.